And I'll say this, Constantine, that the best way to approach the Muslim Brotherhood is to see it as an ideology. Mm-hmm. So if we talk about something called the MBI, Muslim Brotherhood ideology, and then we're onto something, then we're fighting the true battle of ideas. Just saying we're going to shut down their bank accounts, although helpful, is really...
Ed Hussein walks into this conversation, carrying the rare authority of a man who once lived inside the machine he now wants to dismantle. What follows is not another polite seminar on extremism. It is a slow exposure of the Muslim Brotherhood as the operating system that turned political Islam into a global project, and the uncomfortable silence that still greets anyone who names it.
The best way to approach the Muslim Brotherhood is to see it as an ideology. If Mecca, the UAE, Egypt, and other Muslim countries can reject them and de-radicalize their population, what stops us from saying we too will reject what came out of Nazism and Marxism here in the West?
You're saying something what I think is quite extraordinary, which is that the government of Britain and the intelligence services of Britain are fostering and allowing this extremism to flourish in Britain because it gives them leverage in their dealings with Arab countries?
Yes. Yes.
Well, that's extraordinarily irresponsible and dangerous, isn't it?
That's a statement of fact.
Isn't that suicidal?
That's how the strategy started in the 1980s. It's suicidal because they thought they could contain it. If it admits what you've just asked them, Francis, to admit, it means A, they're responsible, and B, they must do something about it.
Ed Hussein, welcome back to Trigonometry.
Constantine, Francis, thank you for having me.
Oh, it's great to have you on. We want to talk to you really about two things, both of which we've covered in previous interviews, but not in the level of detail that we want to go into. One of them is effectively the seed of all extremist Islamist organizations in the world, which is the Muslim Brotherhood. And I was just confessing to you that it was only when you talked about it on our show last time that we came to the realization that actually this is where all of this stuff springs from. And if we don't know that, I would imagine lots of other...
Sitting Constantine here, Ed Hussein frames the Brotherhood as an ideology, not a social club with a few bad apples. Founded in 1928 by Hassan al-Banna, a primary school teacher in Ismailia, it was born in the shadow of the abolished Ottoman Caliphate and the visible presence of British power and Western cultural influence in Egypt. Al-Banna's answer was not quiet piety, it was organized revival with a political destination. Watching this history laid out so plainly already makes the usual Western talking points sound like someone describing a flood as a bit of damp.
And so we want to talk about that. And the second thing we want to talk about, as you're probably aware, there is a kind of raging debate in countries that have large Muslim populations now, particularly in Europe, about is there such a thing as Islamism, or is all Islam potentially something that becomes extreme?
Yeah.
And you are literally the best placed person in the world to talk to about that. So let's start with the Muslim Brotherhood and just tell everybody what it is, where it comes from, and why it's so important to understand for the modern context.
Great question, and thank you to both of you for having such an interesting or an interested approach to also this global issue, because it's relevant in almost every country and it's going to become even more relevant in the years ahead. But as you rightly identified, Constantine, we've got to go back, and we have to go back to 1928 when the movement started. And it is a movement and not an organization. And I think too often, too many of our political leaders make the mistake of thinking, where is the organization, where is its postcode, and how do we ban it? It's a wider movement. It plays a certain mood music, and it started in 1928 in Egypt for the following reasons. The founder was a primary school teacher. Nothing against you, Francis. But he was a primary school teacher in Egypt, and he had several issues with the wider world. The first issue was he opposed the abolishing of the caliphate in Turkey in 1924, which has just happened 4 years previously. He wanted a kind of Muslim presence, a Muslim dominance, a Muslim-led empire that confronted the West and confronted what was then...
Hussein returns to the two central questions: where this project came from, and whether the neat line between Islam and Islamism actually holds under pressure. The early rejection by Al-Azhar and the Sufi orders is telling. Traditional institutions saw the politicized edge and stepped back. That should have been a warning. Instead, it became part of the founding story. An ideology that cannot tolerate its own scholarly tradition is already advertising what it will do to every other tradition it meets.
Union. So he had that kind of confrontational bug within him, practicing Muslim, observant Muslim. The second issue that he had was he complained in his letters about the presence of American evangelicals across the country, that why are these evangelicals preaching in Egypt, which is a majority Muslim country, and why do we allow this to happen? Where is our Muslim sense of manhood that we let these Americans in? And the third point that really offended him was seeing Egyptian men, Egyptian women dancing, drinking alcohol, spending time on the cruises, and Egypt becoming so westernized to the point that he, as someone from the Egyptian countryside, felt that this westernization, globalization disturbed him. So those three issues, the destruction of the Turkish caliphate, the presence of the Americans and the Brits in the evangelical movements, and third, the westernization of Egyptian society in Cairo, led him to then go to various Egyptian religious institutions, the Al-Azhar, which is a prominent university in Egypt, a religious institution. It's been there since the 950s, so our Oxford, if you like, since before Oxford. Al-Azhar, the greatest prominent Sunni institution. He goes there and says, you're a religious institution, you have thought leadership over every Muslim Sunni country, you should do something about this problem. And Al-Azhar say, we're going to approach this in our own wise, nuanced, complicated way, give us time. And he says, no, we must set up a movement, we must confront this problem head on. So Azhar turned him away. He goes to a group of Muslim mystics. Egypt has these huge mystical orders, Sufi Turuq we call them. And the mystics also turn him away and say,
The goal is restated without soft focus. Restore a caliphate, impose Sharia, and treat existing nation-states as temporary arrangements. This is the source code later adapted by groups that quote the same texts with alarming consistency. ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram and the rest did not invent their references. They inherited them. Common sense suggests looking at the source material rather than the press releases. Why that remains so difficult for so many still watching from a comfortable distance is its own quiet scandal.
dangerous, you're too politicized. That is not the way of the Prophet Muhammad. You've got to be calmer, you've got to accept reality for what it is and change yourself first, and then change follows. And it's not our business to confront America and to confront the Soviet Union. So they disagree with him. And this is the issue, that he's a breakaway from mainstream Islamic norms, that he decides to take it up on himself. He rejects Al-Azhar, the 1,000-year-old Muslim institution that's still there. He rejects the Muslim mystics that are dated from the time of the Prophet Muhammad, old orders, and he says, I will create my own movement and I will work towards recreating the caliphate, bringing back Sharia as state law, and thereby confronting the West, correcting the misdemeanors that I see. So the bug of the Islamic State, whether it's ISIS or Al-Qaeda or Hezbollah, and it's also connected to Iran, by the way, or Hamas, started there in Egypt, in the Suez Canal area called Ismailiyah in 1928. So you were just saying earlier, Francis, we're going to be facing the 100-year moment in a couple of years' time, but the organization still sticks with us and hasn't left us. But there are other points that he then absorbed. Those were the three kind of starting points that motivated him, but then he developed an entire ideology. And I'll say this, Constantine, that the best way to approach the Muslim Brotherhood is to see it as an ideology. So if we talk about something called the MBI, Muslim Brotherhood ideology, and then we're onto something, then we're fighting the true battle of ideas. Just saying we're going to shut down their bank accounts, although helpful, is really putting a Band-Aid, as they say here in America, or a plaster back home in England, with the bleeding problem that the Muslim Brotherhood has.
Hussein is of the opinion that Muslims should put the nation first and the community second. Fair enough in theory. In practice, surveys and street reality in Britain and America often show the reverse hierarchy. The sanitized versions offered by some Western academic Muslims begin to look less like description and more like damage limitation.
across the world.
And just coming back to the ideological inspirations of it, I mean, the issue of the caliphate, I think, is something that's worth exploring, because the caliphate effectively is, it's kind of been explained to us by four other guests in the past, that the central fight within the Muslim world is between the people who believe in nation states and the people who don't want nation states. They want the entire area of the Middle East and perhaps elsewhere to be controlled by one theocratic
Correct.
worldview. And that's essentially the main theme that's driving these people. Is that right?
Correct. Correct. And it's correct because if you take away the argument for creating what they call an Islamic state, then you end up in accepting the status quo, modernity, multiple nation states, and working within these sovereign jurisdictions where you have the rule of law, as the late great Roger Scruton used to put it, the rule of law has jurisdiction, and that jurisdiction is the nation state. That's why some of us have reservations about something called international law. Well, who's going to enforce it? So that's the way of the modern world. Now, those who believe in the Islamic State believe ultimately in creating some kind of Islamist empire. And while they call it an Islamic state, what they mean is their state, their interpretation of Sharia, their form of law, and they or their allocated leaders are in charge for this supranational state. And it's a confrontational state. It's an expansionist state. So it's much like, say, I don't know, the Soviet Union, or at its heyday, the Ottoman Empire. The Chinese weren't really expansionist in those days, but so the question is, what
Does it surprise you that a relatively small, highly motivated cadre can influence a larger, less organized majority? That is not paranoia. It is organizational arithmetic. Qutbi's milestone supplies the moral permission structure. Once you believe you are acting for the greater good of the faith, ordinary conscience becomes optional. The comparison to men who outsource their judgment to an ideology is not rhetorical flourish. It is the logical endpoint. For anyone who simply wants to live in peace and remain free, the program is not abstract. It is an existential threat with a reading list. This is where the defense of Muhammad begins, and where the carefully drawn distinction starts to fray.
it is an Islamic state, right? So the hallmark of their understanding of the Islamic State is that it must have one leader, and it must have frontiers and not borders. In other
What's
words,
the difference?
frontiers are temporary and they can expand. They go and...
How convenient.
So they don't believe in borders or nation states. So the whole world at some point must come under the control of this caliphate or of this Islamic
The
state.
whole world, or just the areas that have been historically populated and controlled by Muslims?
The first priority is to reconquer Spain, Sicily, India, parts of China that were once Muslim. But you don't ultimately stop there. You continue to expand to bring the whole domain under what they call, the domain of peace, or the domain of Islam. Now, here's the problem with this worldview. This is a worldview that was advocated first and foremost by Hassan al-Banna, the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood in the 1920s, and it's then spread on to Hamas and Al-Qaeda and others. But the problem with that worldview is the problem that Hassan al-Banna found in the 1920s, that most Muslims rejected him and reject the Brotherhood. And if you read classical Islamic literature, there is no reference to the Islamic system. This was taken from Hegelian thought. This was taken from later German Nazi thought, that we must create a system, we must create a Reich, we must be against the Jews, we must be against the West, we must reconquer land. This was the mood music of the 1920s and 30s that the Muslim Brotherhood embraces, absorbs, and continues to protect. There was a very, very high-level, prominent Muslim scholar called Ali Abdul Raziq in 1926, wrote a book called...
The claim that he was not a warlord, that the marriage to Aisha has been misunderstood, that a Jewish wife named Safiya proves a spirit of tolerance. Each lands with the weight of someone protecting the foundation rather than examining it. Historical sources are clear enough. After Khaybar, Safiya's husband and male kin were killed. She was taken as a captive and married. Presenting that as interfaith harmony requires a special kind of selective lighting. And it gets worse.
Islam and governance, And in it, he very, in detailed fashion, drawing on Muslim jurisprudence for 1400 years, says there is no system of governance within Muslim cultures, plural. And we know that when the Prophet Muhammad passed away, he doesn't allocate a particular caliph. He doesn't say there's going to be a caliphate. He doesn't say you must all be united under this one ruler, because even in his time, there were Muslims living in Abyssinia. There were Muslims who were living in Mecca. And subsequent to him, there was an Umayyad caliphate out of Damascus, and there was another caliphate out of Mecca. And even in the days of the Muslim Brotherhood, when they were founded, there were Muslims living in Indonesia, in Morocco, that did not come under Ottoman or Turkish rule. So the argument is nothing other than propaganda. The argument is nothing other than their theorizing of creating a 1,000-year Reich, or in their context, a 1,000-year caliphate, to try and control the rest of us. And if I may just say one other thing, their biggest enemies are not the Israelis. The biggest enemies are not really the Western countries. It's fellow Muslims, because it's other Muslims that opposed them. And they went, and as we will go through some of the subsequent decades, they assassinated Egyptian prime ministers, Egyptian judges, and then they go and assassinate Jordanian politicians, Saudi politicians, and Al-Qaeda, as we've seen, leads that assassination culture into this great city here, New York, and 9/11 was a result of that. So, their enemies, yes, ultimately become the West, and ultimately what they call
The phrase live and let live, when applied to the broader tradition, produces the same effect as watching someone describe a loaded weapon as a paperweight. No tradition that places its founding figure beyond ordinary historical scrutiny can simultaneously claim the full toolkit of liberal self-examination. If open questioning of Muhammad were routine, the numbers and the atmosphere would look different. By the time the warlord question is pressed, the projection becomes hard to miss.
But it's really ordinary Muslims that oppose them and reject them. And the best evidence for that is, we have 2 billion Muslims roughly. The Muslim Brotherhood's membership maximum, if we include its global following, is probably no more than 5 million, and I'm being very generous. So it's a small, I think it was Gramsci who said an organized minority can control a disorganized majority. So that's where we are. It's a very organized, coherent minority.
And very well motivated. I remember reading a book called Milestones. Remind me who it's by. He's very closely connected to
Sayyid Qutb, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the thing is, I think part of the problem and why we don't understand these things very well is we've been conditioned. I don't know whether it's Hollywood or whether it's just human brains or whether it's World War II or whatever, but we have this vision that the people who want to fight us or kill us, they do so because they're evil. They're motivated by evil. But when you read Milestones, you go, oh, this makes a lot of sense, because they actually believe that Islam is good and it's the light and it must be brought to everybody because everybody will benefit. And therefore, if you have to kill some people, that's basically every evil, everyone who's done evil in history has been motivated by something like this.
Yes,
right?
Yes. Hannah Arendt writes about this after she observes the Eichmann trial in Jerusalem in the 1960s, trying to understand the Nazis. They never saw themselves as bad people or as evil people. Most Nazis just said, we were doing our jobs, And that's the danger when you abandon your own conscience and you think you're just doing your job. And the problem with lots of religious people is they think we're just doing God's command. And there's a real danger there that you can end up following, say, for example, in the case of Iran.
The separation between Brotherhood ideology and the wider tradition proves thinner than advertised. What remains is a project that has tested democratic openings in more than one country and repeatedly produced the same result. That pattern is not accidental. It is diagnostic. The enemy is not only approaching the gates. In too many Western cities, it has already been offered institutional cover and polite deference. The warnings have been issued with unusual clarity. Civilizations have rarely been given this much notice while still preferring debate without consequence. Moderate voices tend to thin out the moment their brothers take the streets. At a certain point, conversation without enforcement becomes another form of managed decline. What stays with you longer? The clarity with which the ideological machinery was described, or the speed with which the foundation had to be defended once the historical record was allowed into the room.